Hello, everybody. Good morning.
Good morning, Venerable.
Good morning.
Morning. So, good. We're here again.
Welcome back.
Yes. Okay. Good. All right.
Got a few more with us this morning. Numbers are climbing.
Hello, everybody. Good morning.
Good morning, Venerable.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. So, Friday night for me. It's Santa Fe. Not quite dark yet. Spring is coming. Autumn is coming. Okay. Good. All right. We've got that echo again. Rain. Now. Rain. Rain, can you
Someone.
our voice is coming back again.
Should be good.
Okay. So everybody, let's do our little motivation. Start off in the right direction. Our prayer, right? With our prayer. Okay. All right. There we go. Okay. So thinking first. Our motivation is the main thing. I said I'd talk about it, and I really haven't done that yet, and I will now. I'll discuss it because it's what's behind the whole thing about karma, you know. Okay, which we started talking about yesterday. So the first two lines of this prayer, for anyone who's already identifying with being a Buddhist, is reminding us of our reliance, you know, on the Buddha and his teachings. And the second two lines are stating we'd say, what's our purpose? Why are we here together? The Tibetans would say, what's our motivation? Which we'll talk about today. So motivation means, it's actually, according to karma, we'll discuss it. What we think and do, like we said yesterday, what we think and do and say programs our mind. And the key factor that determines the character of the thing we think and do and say, that determines the seed we plant, which determines the future result, happiness or suffering, isn't even the action, it's the motivation behind the action. The motivation is what gives the character to the action. So the bigger and the more powerful and the more altruistic and the more perfect and the more pure the motivation, obviously every one of those seeds that's planted will ripen in the best, most powerful way. It's very logical, but we have to think about it, you know. So, okay, our motivation here for doing this activity of being here together, listening to Buddha's teachings, and I'm the one going blah, blah, but I promise you I'm listening as well. The motivation, the long-term one, the biggest one, you can't get a bigger one, is we're going to listen to these teachings so that we can take these tools from these teachings so we can develop our amazing potential. So we can help others all the way to leading them to enlightenment. That's the idea. Make that our motivation. Sangye charang soke chognam la jancho baru dagi chonyen gi personam ki rola penchir sangye drupashok. Sangye charang soke chognam la jancho baru dagi kapsuchi dagi chonyen gi personam ki rola penchir sangye drupashok. Sangye charang soke chognam la jancho badu dagni kyapsuchi dagi chonyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shok. So far these last 2 days we've talked about the first level of practice, which is karma, and then the next level of practice, which is about the mind. We've kind of mixed them up together a bit. And if we want to put it into the whole package, this lam rim, you know, one way of breaking up that package, and I find this such a helpful analogy, is the two wings of the bird. The bird needs two wings, wisdom and compassion. So the wisdom wing, I mean, speaking simply, it's all the work you do. It's really the nuts and bolts of Buddha's teachings about karma and the mind. That's the stuff that is the basis of one's own practice in order to develop one's own potential. Then the compassion wing, on the basis of success at that wisdom wing, you help others. So as His Holiness says, I mean, in general, compassion is the point. To become a Buddha means you're completely oneness with infinite empathy, the wish to benefit others. But what gives you the power to benefit others isn't your compassion, it's your wisdom. It's just knowing how to do it. And that's the nuts and bolts of the first and second scopes of the Lam Rim, or I like to call it the junior school and high school. When we hear that, we understand the teachings are like incremental, progressive. We understand this when it comes to ordinary activities. Any ordinary activities, you know, you start with the simple stuff, you go to the middle stuff, and then you get to the most advanced stuff, and then you graduate. But we never think like that with a spiritual path. But that's the implication of this lam rim. You know, that's why it's helpful to call it. I mean, it's called literally. It is translated as gradual path. But it's kind of quaint, isn't it? We don't, you know, when you go to school, you go to junior school, high school, and university. You don't say I'm on a gradual path. It's literally true, but it's not the term we use. That's why I like to call junior school, high school, university, and then postgraduate. We get the meaning, you know, we get the meaning. So it's very evident also, you can't whiz off to university, not to mention postgraduate, without junior school and high school. It's kind of obvious. And if you go and if you're really bright, you'll whiz through it quickly, but you can't ignore it. You can't bypass it. Because any knowledge is gradual, incremental, and that's the point about the spiritual practice, about the Buddhist path. And as I said yesterday, maybe even the first day, what does a Buddhist mean? You know, we've got cliched, weird ideas about being a Buddhist, but being a Buddhist means rethinking, learning to think like a Buddha, learning to see the world as a Buddha does. And that's what the lam rim is. It's a presentation of Buddha's thoughts about how the world exists. And why should you do that? Well, the point for the Buddha, the crucial point, and this is not how we think either about knowledge, so especially philosophical knowledge or psychological knowledge. The point of it is that's how you stop suffering. So you can frame the whole of Buddha's teachings in terms of getting happiness and stopping suffering. You can equally describe Buddhism exactly as a presentation of ethics. You can also absolutely present it as a system of getting rid of ignorance and getting wisdom, of learning, getting in sync with how things exist. But the interesting point is they all come together with Buddhism. And this is not how we think in the West. This is why we get confused when we think of Buddhist philosophy. Or you fill your head full of interesting concepts, you know. The only reason to fill your head full of musical theory is so you play the piano. The only reason to fill your head full of cake recipes is to make a cake. Well, the only reason to fill your head with Buddhist philosophy is so that you can become a Buddha. And why do you want to do that? Because it's your natural potential. So the interesting thing is, I think in our modern world, in our modern understanding of science and things, we're genius, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So many brilliant thinkers and lots of brilliant people thinking, you know, talking to the Dalai Lama and understanding, looking at science and linking up science with the Buddhist ideas about emptiness, for example. Fantastic, wonderful, get us so excited. But I think the interesting point in our culture, you can be the most genius mathematician on the planet. You can be the best musician in the universe. You can be the best surgeon in the universe. But you can still go home and beat up your husband and children. Because we don't see all that knowledge as having anything to do with ethics or happiness. And that's where the approach to wisdom, the approach to ethics, and the approach to happiness, it all comes to the same thing. They all are three different ways of coming to the same result. Because the method for getting happy is to live it according to ethics, good ethics. And that leads you to finally understand how things exist. And that's the final method for getting happy. Why? Because very simply, Buddha says the extent to which we're caught up in misconceptions about the universe, the extent to which we're caught up in misconceptions about how things exist, is the extent to which we suffer and therefore harm others. So the starting point, junior school, entry level, grade 1, like we talked yesterday, was you start Buddha's first instructions. First, if you want to follow Buddha, he's not forcing you, he's not a boss, he's not a creator, is to abide by the laws of ethics. Don't harm others. Why not? Because every millisecond of what you think and do and say produces the person you become. You're the creator of yourself. His Holiness calls the law of karma, he said you can call it self-creation. So we discussed this yesterday, and of course it's related, utterly related to the mind, inextricably related to the mind, because the mind creates karma. The body and speech carry out the wishes of the mind, but the whole process starts with the mind. As Lama Zopa says, everything exists on the tip of the wish, the thought, the intention. In fact, the actual word the word that is translated, the actual meaning of the word karma, action, is mental action. Mental action. And that's called intention. One of the many states of mind that I like to call the mechanics of our mind, the one that starts the ball rolling in every single thing we ever think and do, is the word intention. I will, volition. We're totally programmed with trillions of intentions because of practicing in the past, and we don't even notice 90% of the time. You know? So the mind is everything. The mind is the creator of the universe. The mind is the creator of happiness. The mind is the creator of suffering. Everything comes from the mind. And that's not a cliche for the Buddha. It's literal truth. So understanding the mind and then how it creates karma, this is the fundamental, as I said, the nuts and bolts of all of Buddha's teachings. This is the basis of all practice. Then on the basis of success of this, and as we had that really good discussion yesterday, that's how we get compassion. And like we discussed yesterday, and let's look at a bit that now. Let's look at the whole path through the lenses of compassion wing now. It's a very interesting take on it all. As we discussed yesterday, you know, the view that Buddha has of compassion is so different from the way we understand compassion. It's very fascinating. And that's what we unpacked yesterday in that really excellent discussion. So, okay, let's look at the compassion wing. So one thing that's constant from the second you start practicing in junior school all the way to graduating as a Buddha, the one thing that's constant is you're working on your mind. And as I like to remind us all the time, and it's so helpful to remember this, you know, if we look at the word Buddha itself, the word Sangye in Tibetan, the etymology is really delicious. It tells us exactly the end result, which implies exactly the entire methodology. Bud or Sang implies the utter eradication from our own mind of all ego, all fears, all neuroses, all the nonsense, all the stuff we're intimately familiar with. Buddha has found from his own experience that this stuff is not at the core of our being and therefore can be removed. And why should we remove it? Because it's the source of our suffering and the source of why we have others. Then the second syllable, da, not only can we get rid of all the rubbish, we can develop to perfection all the other parts of our mind, love and compassion, etc., all the good stuff. It's seen such a simplistic idea almost, and there's nothing equivalent in modern psychology or in neuroscience. There's nothing remotely like this. In fact, initially we hear it, it just sounds ridiculous. We can't even imagine a person who's got no anger, no fear, no anxiety. They sound like a mentally ill person as far as we're concerned. Because we give equal status to all these neurotic parts of the mind and the virtuous parts of the mind. We just think a normal person consists of some of all of these. So there's no view in modern science or philosophy or psychology that would indicate anything like this. So it's really hard to hear it initially. But this is what Buddha's saying. So that if it is true, that's our natural potential, to be rid of all the rubbish and full of all the goodness. If that's true, then it's obvious we better know what the mind is, because all that stuff exists in the mind. Because your mind possesses this potential to become a Buddha, which is how we've been talking already. We have to understand the mind from the Buddha's point of view. And we have to understand how we create happiness and suffering and how all this stuff happens. We have to unpack and unravel all of these states of mind. That's what being a Buddhist means. So on the basis of any success to any degree at that level is the extent to which you can then have some semblance of compassion for others. And why the compassion wing is coming second is it's very evident if we start to look into our own experiences that the more we're caught up in ego grasping, the root delusion, and we haven't talked about that yet, but we will, the more we talk about the root delusion, the mother of them all, and the more we talk about attachment and aversion and all the other thousands that come as a result, the more we observe, like we talked yesterday, the more we observe these in our mind, the more we are going to see the unbelievable suffering and pain that they cause us. So when we're caught up in attachment and anger and depression and jealousy and anxiety and worries and fears and stress and all the rest, it's absolutely crystal clear to us that we're completely imprisoned in ourself. We can't see past our own nose. And when we do see past our own nose, we're seeing everyone and everything through the lenses of our needs, which is these neurotic states of mind, which is, as we discussed yesterday, is why we harm anybody. So it's clear that the delusions will not only cause us suffering, but they are what cut us off from others. We can see it with ordinary people, even if you don't want to look at yourself. Anybody who's mean and selfish, they're horrible to other people. They have no empathy whatsoever. It is so obvious, you know. But because we're so arrogant and we think, oh, all these terrible people out there, everyone else is bad, we don't even notice our own thoughts and feelings and emotions, you know. And that's why the first step has to be this. We've got to really become familiar with our own mind. And the reason there is not to feel guilty or neurotic, but to have compassion for ourselves. They don't say it like that in Buddhism, but we understand that meaning. That's what renunciation is. You're renouncing and giving up suffering and its causes because you are up to here with suffering. You're fed up with suffering. You're exhausted by your own suffering. You've got to have that first. Then it's obvious. Every tiny step in progress you make in terms of lessening your own neuroses, you grow your goodness. Therefore, you're expanding your sense of I to encompass others. So compassion will naturally come. So as you progress onto the compassion wing, you continue working on your mind. That never changes, but the emphasis changes. So the main emphasis in the wisdom wing is back off and leave others alone, please. Mind your own business. Get out of other people's heads, mind your own business. And the entire universe, from the wisdom wing point of view, is there to help you learn about yourself. It's like the retreat mode. It's intensive, intense and intensive. It must be if you're doing it properly. That's what you're doing as a Buddhist. You're becoming intimately familiar with your own junk, your own depression, your own anxiety, and seeing how it causes you pain. That's the point. Not blaming other people, not getting off the hook, not, oh, it's not my fault, which is how our ego wants to think. So it's really full on. You've got to have a lot of courage to do that properly. That's the wisdom wing. You leave sentient beings alone. That's the relationship on the wisdom wing. The relationship you have with others is back off and mind your own business and leave them alone. That's why the whole emphasis in that path is to not harm and not kill and not steal and not badmouth and not watch your body, speech, and mind like a hawk and protect yourself from harming others for your sake. It really is the retreat mode. Best way to do it is give up sex, drugs, and rock and roll, go to the mountains. It's the quickest way to get the wisdom wing down, you know. Then there's the compassion wing. And the emphasis there, you're working on your mind, but now the emphasis is to learn to break down the barriers that ego grasping and the delusions have constructed between self and other. So now you're getting more courageous. You've got more control over your body, speech, and mind. You know your own mind really well. And you start to look outside and you go, oh my God, we're all in the same boat. And that was our discussion yesterday. How you can have compassion for a pedophile, let's say. How you can have compassion for a Harvey Weinstein who jumps, you know, runs around jumping on women. And it's hard for us to get the really perfect questions you asked. I forget who it was. Who was it who asked the question? What was her name?
Anne Brewster.
Here again? Who?
Anne Brewster.
Anne, okay, good. So Anne's put was such a good point, you know, because the way she asked her question was so evident, the assumptions we have. So as soon as we have compassion for Harvey Weinstein, let's say, we discussed him yesterday, for jumping on all those women, abusing, arrogant, all that. Then as soon as we think we've got to have compassion for him, and as she said, we pat him on the head and say, poor thing, can't help it. That's how we think because we have a misconception of compassion. You see, in other words, the way we have compassion now, and look at the world, compassion, as far as we're concerned, the compassion we have is reserved for innocent victims. That's it. You've got to be innocent. Then I'm prepared to have compassion for you. It's so arrogant. It shows so clearly how we have no idea about what's going on in our own mind, you know. Because if we're really doing the wisdom wing, when I read the news, I love reading all my newspapers and, you know, on my computer, of course, on my iPad. You know, I read all these different papers and magazines, and you read about human beings. And if you're really trying to work on your own mind, reading about human beings is grist for the mill. It's brilliant. So like if you're studying acupuncture, you can't wait to look at sick people. Every person you see, you're checking them up, analyzing. Oh my God, look at that, look at this, look at that. You're learning from people. Well, if you're trying to work on your own mind, you want to read about garbage people. You want to read about crummy old politicians. Because it's all grist for the mill for you. And so when I read it on the wisdom wing point of view, if I'm reading the papers, my emphasis is this. This is the wisdom wing. I read about Mr. Trump. Let's say he's a great example. And I go, oh, he lies. Seems like he lies. I recognize that. He's got attachment. I recognize that. He's into food. I recognize that. You know, he's attached to whatever. He's arrogant. I recognize that. He's self-centered. I recognize that. And then I say that to myself. Every one of the things I see in Mr. Trump, there's nothing in Mr. Trump that I don't see in myself. There is nothing I see in Mr. Weinstein that I don't see in myself. Okay, I mightn't jump on women. I mightn't be as big and as fat and as arrogant. Perhaps I am, but I recognize those delusions. This is so immediately powerful for the mind. Instead of, oh, look at that evil person. How dare he do this? This is how we talk, you know. So then every second you read the papers, every second you read your iPad, every second you watch television, if you're practicing properly, it's a powerful experience to learn about the human mind. And all you got to go is, wow, I recognize that. Or you go, thank you for showing me how not to be. It's a powerful learning. But what do? We get depressed about it. We freak out. We get angry. We get upset. We can't. And then we want to turn the television off because we don't know how to cope with it. We don't know how to interpret it. And that would be really true. It's very interesting. If you don't know, let's say using acupuncture as a body of knowledge of how to help people, how to heal people. If you've got no awareness of acupuncture, you've got no idea why people are sick. You don't know how to analyze it. So obviously, if you walk around the world and you see fat, overweight, sick people, you will only get depressed because you don't know how to help them. That's a really good point. And you don't recognize anything in them. But if you're learning acupuncture, you love meeting sick people because every one of them is grist for the mill for you to learn more about acupuncture. That's exactly the point I'm making here. So we should have this courage. You must dying to wake up every morning and read the paper about the latest suffering, the latest crazy politicians, the latest terrorist, the latest rapist. And because you're learning about delusions and suffering and you go, that's mine. I get that. I recognize that. This is not the compassion wing yet. This is the wisdom wing. Now, if you ought to put on your compassion glasses and you read the same news, now what will happen? I'm going to have compassion for Mr. Weinstein. Why? Because he's full of delusions. God in heaven, look at him. Looks like full of delusions, full of arrogance, full of attachment, full of anger, full of jealousy. And I know how ugly mine are. I know how painful mine are. So can you only imagine how painful his are? I know that because of my delusions, any harm that I do is because of them. And look at the harm I do to others because of my delusions. When, oh my God, look at Mr. Weinstein and the harm he does to others. So we understand why he's doing it. We will have compassion because he's ignorant and arrogant and doesn't know he's harming himself by harming other people. That's the basis for compassion. Compassion, the way Buddha talks about it, is impossible without the wisdom wing. It's the wrong analysis. And this is why it's really hard, you know. I mean, for me, emptiness is easier than compassion. I'd rather talk about emptiness. I feel more relaxed about emptiness. But compassion is intense. The Bodhisattva path level of compassion is outrageous. But we think it's all cute and soft. You have no idea it's nothing like that. It is intense and is on the basis of you understanding your karma, your delusions, your suffering, and being sick of it. That is the basis of compassion. Then your compassion is genuine, and then it will be naturally for everybody. But right now, based on thinking we're all innocent victims who didn't ask to get born, and there are the saints and the sinners, and we love a pure saint and a horrible sinner. Extreme dualistic view, you know, no comprehension of the human mind. So compassion is outrageous. It's advanced. It is advanced. It's not just having a gooey feeling. People talk about having compassion for animals. Mostly it's because of attachment. I'm not being rude to you if you're one of those people. We only have compassion for a few animals, ones we think are cute, that look like us, with tails that wag, you know, and eyes look all cute. I'm sorry. We don't have compassion for the rats. We don't have compassion for the cane toads in Queensland that would give you cause you to have an agonizing death if you ate them. We don't have compassion for the mosquitoes who dare to take one tiny, tiny drop of my precious blood. We don't have compassion for the mice, the cockroaches, because they dare to upset us. So we only have compassion for cute ones that we're attached to, you know. It's so limited. We're so limited in our compassion. Better than nothing. Better than nothing, but it's too limited. It's based on attachment, you know. And that's where the framework for understanding the compassion wing is so powerful. If we look into the practices, you know, if you know from the Lam Rim, there's two main methods that are used that culminate in bodhicitta. Because the culmination of junior school is you have the renunciation of realizing about karma. And and that stops you from creating, at least stops you from the heaviest level of suffering. Then the next level is you start to get more deep into your mind, and and that really gets you a deeper understanding of renunciation. And the next level of realization is on the compassion wing now, and the next stage is accomplishing bodhicitta, which is this outrageous attitude. Bodhicitta is not equivalent of compassion; it's the culmination of compassion. So we've got these two techniques we see in the Lamrim. One is called the 6 causes and 1 effect, or the 7-point something or other. And the other one is called exchanging self for others, or like this one of transforming problems, lojong, mind training. This more radical method for smashing the main enemy here is called self-cherishing. It's interesting, by the way, let's just get clear about this term as well. So in the first wing, the first wisdom wing, where you're working on your body, speech, and mind, the main cause of suffering is called attachment. This neurotic, distorted, over-exaggeration, this emotional hunger, actually, that comes from dissatisfaction, that causes me to always want something more, that then causes me to exaggerate the deliciousness of something, and then convince that when I get it, I'll get happy, whether it's the boy, whatever it might be, the object. So attachment, and at this very heavy, at the deepest level, the heaviest level in this first level of practice, is what we've learned to see as the main enemy. Now in the compassion wing, we're continuing to work on our mind. That doesn't change, like I said. We're continuing to try to lessen our attachment and grow our goodness. But here, the main enemy is called self-cherishing. And it's basically, we call it in our culture selfishness. Now we say, oh yeah, I've got so much attachment. Wow, I've got so much attachment. But if you say, oh, I'm so selfish, we don't like that. That sounds very awful. If someone accuses us of being selfish, we really feel bad. Selfish or self-cherishing, as the Tibetans call it, it sounds very nice, isn't it? Because the word cherishing. I remember one time in Vermont at the center, the Milarepa Center, the course we were doing was how to work at the self-cherishing. And a woman who'd never been to any Buddhist teachings heard about it and said, oh, I'd love to learn how to cherish myself. She got a big shock when she discovered it was referring to selfishness, But it's a nice term, cherish. So it refers to being selfish. So that's indicating the emphasis in the compassion wing. What we're trying to conquer in the compassion wing is to give up cherishing self, to make this paradigm shift where we now cherish others. And that's finally when you'll get bodhicitta. So it's a whole different approach. The delusions are the same, but the approach is different. In the first and second scopes, in the junior school and high school and the wisdom wing, we're trying to subdue attachment, and attachment to the essence. And that means control our body and our speech and our mind. We're trying to subdue attachment and the other delusions in order to not harm yourself. Here, we're trying to subdue self-cherishing and all the practices. And there's a combination. Let's just go through some of these. There's a combination of these two methods that have a list of about 11 little techniques. Each one incrementally leading to the next, expanding more, gradually making the shift, finally with, when we get bodhicitta, when finally then the first moment of having bodhicitta, not just a moment of it, not just a flash of it, not just a feeling of it, but a genuine realization is when you finally made this shift, when now others are more important than self. And that's why hearing these words very simply indicates it's a much more advanced practice. Because if you're an ordinary person who hasn't even begun to practice yet, in other words, join the club here, like all of us, we're self-centered, we're unhappy, we're the victim, we feel it's not fair, we feel the world harms us, it's not my fault. That's us before we start to practice. We're the victim. That's what a victim is. It's a miserable, hopeless person who blames everybody else, feels absolutely outraged, is suffering badly. So if you hear that you've got to exchange yourself for others, if you hear that you've got to see other people as more important than you, this is insane. You're not ready for that. As Pavanka Rinpoche said, for that level of practice, you've got to be a suitable vessel. That's why the really outrageous teachings in Tibet, all expressed in that very sweet, simple 8 verses of mind training by Langri Tangpa. It was kept secret in the beginning. It was kept secret because the teachings in it are so outrageous. They're so advanced. And for most of us, the way we are, being ordinary victims who are overwhelmed, who have crummy husbands and lousy jobs and bad things happen, and we can't, it's hard to practice. To hear that I've got to see myself as the lowest of all, as the second verse says in that 8 verses. I mean, if you're a therapist and you advise the person to see themselves as the lowest of all, you could sue the therapist. It's just bizarre instructions. So we cannot understand this level of compassion teachings until we have understood the wisdom wing, until we have understood karma and got a sense of our own suffering and how we are the cause of our own suffering. It's impossible. Compassion is not enough, as His Holiness says. You need wisdom. And that's the logic of the path, the way it's structured. So the first of these 11 techniques, in both of the cases of the 7 points and the other one, the first one is this practice of equanimity. And this is a marvelous way, a marvelous framework for really understanding the beginnings of compassion. So what's compassion? The definition of compassion, well, there's love and compassion. They're the essence, really, of all the virtues. And even we can see by referring to it as the compassion wing or the compassion path, even it can all be encapsulated in compassion. So love is a thought. They all come down to being thoughts, the definition. And it's in the virtuous heading. Okay, go back a second. As we have discussed briefly, well, I'll say it again here, which is, you can divide, Buddha would divide all the contents of our mind, the thousands and thousands of different thoughts in there, into 3 categories. There's no 4th category. This is very helpful to understand. The first lot are the negative, neurotic, delusional, disturbing, disturbing emotions. Ego grasping is the root, which assumes the presence of an inherent me. Then on the basis of that, there's this bottomless pit of hunger and craving and attachment to get what that fantasy me wants. And on the basis of attachment not getting what it wants, it gives rise to anger. They're the 3 poisons, the 3 toxic emotions, which are all the 84,000 that Buddha talks about, all subsumed to these 3. Then you've got the positive ones, virtuous ones, constructive, beneficial, useful, valid states of mind. The first lot are not valid. That means in Buddhism, a valid cognition is a state of mind that's in sync with reality, conventional, ultimate, whatever. 1 + 1 is 3 is not a valid cognition, according to the laws of mathematics that we all agree upon. Well, attachment is not a valid cognition because it exaggerates the deliciousness of that cake. It over-exaggerates, embellishes. As Lama Zopa says, it decorates on top of what is there, layers upon layers of characteristics that aren't there. That's the key characteristic of all the neurotic states of mind, which is why they cause us suffering. We're living in la-la land. The object that attachment grasps at doesn't exist. There is a chocolate cake there. That's valid. But the cake that attachment sees isn't there. This is a crucial thing to understand about all the neurotic emotions and all these misconceptions. It's the key way all the negative states of mind function. And until we get this, we won't understand Buddhist psychology at all. Then you've got the states of mind that are valid. The first lot cause you suffering. Why? Because they're not valid, because they're not in sync with reality. It's like you've got a $5 note, but you believe it is 50. This is the way the delusions function. It's very fascinating. You believe for so long that $5 is 50. You have all these expectations of it being 50. You expect the $50 worth every time you go to spend it, and you're disappointed every time because it's not reality. You're completely out of sync with reality. What you think and what exists are separate things. That's the way we all suffer. That's how delusions function. They're not in touch with reality, and that's why we suffer and therefore harm others. But the virtues, conventionally speaking, are valid. This is a very powerful thought, it's very fascinating. So what is love? It's the definition of love. It's a thought. It starts with a thought. And it's when you see someone happy, you delight for them. May you be happy. You're delighted with someone's happiness, when someone's happy. That's love. Compassion, you see suffering and you think, may you not suffer. You have empathy for someone suffering. That's compassion. So equanimity is the first of these 11 techniques. It's the foundation practice without which you cannot grow the compassion that Buddha is talking about. And so this equanimity is brilliant, So there's different uses of the word equanimity. On the wisdom wing, in the first stages of practice, we can talk about equanimity that you cultivate, and it's referring to a state of mind that you cultivate when you begin to harness your body, speech, and mind, and you become more stable within yourself. I mean, right now we're up and down like yo-yos, aren't we? We're completely crazy. I don't be sarcastic when I say we're all bipolar. It's just a question of degree. Then when the mind's completely out of control, when attachment's getting what it wants, and you think you're the Queen of England, you think you can fly in the sky, everything's divine and perfect. You're up crazy. Then the bubble bursts because it's living in a fantasy land, and you go crashing down to despair. We have 1,000 moments, 1,000 mini episodes of this every single day, and it's the functioning of attachment and aversion. It mightn't be evident to us initially, but the more we think about it, the more it'll seem very clear. So our minds are unstable. We're up and down like yo-yos. We can see this. So there's no equanimity within ourselves. But as we practice harnessing our body, speech, and mind, we develop more clarity, more equanimity within ourselves, more stable, less pulled from pillar to post by everything that goes on in the world. This is fantastic. Now the equanimity here is different. It's in relation to sentient beings. And this is how it helps us begin to understand compassion now. So here, equanimity, the first of these 11, which we need to cultivate, what it is, when you've accomplished it, would be this heartfelt recognition that friend, enemy, and stranger, and there's no fourth category of sentient beings in the universe, will describe that friend, enemy, and stranger are equal to each other from one point of view. This is what equanimity is. It's this particular equanimity, the recognition, when you've got it, the heartfelt recognition that enemy, friend, and stranger are equal to each other from one point of view. They each want to be happy, and they each don't want to suffer. That's equanimity. So the words are not complicated, but oh my goodness, to get this is unbelievable. And this is the first of the 11. This is the beginning. This is the foundation. This is the basis. This is in the roots and the ground upon which you can then validly grow proper love, compassion, great compassion, which eventually culminates in bodhicitta. So it's crucial to understand it properly. We get very vague about all these kind of nice words. We get very kind of vague. This is precise. This is the basis upon which you can build valid love and compassion for everybody. So what's the logic of this? What's the logic? Okay, what is a friend, enemy, and a stranger? These are the three objects in terms of sentient beings of the three delusions, the three poisons. Object of attachment we call a friend. It's a simple word. It's a useful word, a friend. That's the object of our attachment. Why do we call them a friend? Because they do what my attachment wants. That's the definition in terms of using the delusions. So of course, on top of that, we also do happen to have love and compassion, maybe bucket loads for those friends. But why? As Lama Zopa says, as we say in our culture, they've got strings attached. But as Lama Zopa puts it, they're unstable. And this is very brutal. It seems so brutal, but this is logic if we look into it. The only people we love, meaning we want to be happy, for whom we have affection, whom we adore, are the ones who do what my attachment wants. I mean, we should be embarrassed by how self-centered this is. But this is just the world. It's so natural. Nobody questions this. Because we call it natural. And we can have enormous amount of love. We have incredible love. But our trouble also is, because we don't have this in our culture, in our psychology, we conflate love and attachment. So you love your child, you love your partner, especially if you're in love. We don't even know how to begin to distinguish attachment from love. For us, as far as we're concerned, they are one thing. This is the major mistake we make. And this is why, unless we do the wisdom wing first, learning about the mind, learning clearly about these different states of mind, understanding the definitions, recognizing how they're so different. They are like chalk and cheese. But as far as we're concerned in our world, they are one thing. So utterly mistaken. And this is a minefield for us. So right now, a friend is a person, whatever degree of friend, who's a person who looks lovely to me. Now, what makes a person look lovely to you is your attachment. You got your attachment glasses on. Your attachment glasses, when you got your attachment glasses on, which is the part of your mind that comes from your own emotional hunger to get what that attachment wants. It's this massive emotional hunger. That then when it finds the cake or the person or the event or the color or the shape or the smell or the sound that fits your needs, it will look and appear and smell and taste and touch beautiful. We don't notice we're doing that. We think the cake is delicious in its bones. We think Fred, who is so divine to you, and yes, he is kind to you, and yes, he is a good person, but you absolutely adore Fred. He looks like heaven on earth to you. And you think it because he's an adorable person, as if gorgeousness is coursing in his veins along with his blood. No, your attachment is painting a fantasy picture of Fred. The attachment paints a fantasy picture of chocolate cake. We can't see this. This is wisdom wing. So here with friend, all the people we adore are the ones who do what our attachment wants. Of course, we know that our beloved partner in the morning, when he does what he wants, he gives me a nice cup of tea and smiles at me. Then in the evening, he farts in the bed and is mean to me. Then you hate him. Okay, we know it changes day by day, but we can see the difference in our mind. 1 minute, if he looks horrible, it's because he just didn't do what your attachment wanted. Come on. I mean, we should be embarrassed by this. Not be embarrassed. We should be delighted to learn about our mind and why we suffer. So our attachment and love are mixed completely. We can't see the difference, you know. So a friend by definition here is the one who does what my attachment wants, who appears gorgeous to me, and then for whom I do have love and compassion. I do have love and compassion. It's better than nothing, but it's unstable and it's got strings attached. It's contingent on attachment. It's fascinating. We should be embarrassed. Well, at least happy to see it. The next one, what's an enemy? We mightn't use the word enemy. I tell you, we don't use that in our lives. It sounds so heavy. But it is anybody who is the object of your aversion, the bare bones state of mind that's the basis of anger or depression on the entire spectrum. There's a whole spectrum for anger, annoyed, irritated, frustrated, all the way down to depression. They're all the expression of thwarted attachment, and they're called aversion. One is volatile and violent, called anger, and one is internalized and hard to see, called depression. They're all aversion. And aversion is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. This is an unbelievable insight. So attachment is, you know, you see something, oh, that's lovely, and you go towards it. Aversion is you see something, oh no, that's horrible, and you go away. And they're completely instinctive. We can see this, you know. And they're the main voices of ego grasping. So friend is an object of your attachment. As long as they keep doing what your attachment wants, you will keep loving them and having compassion for them. We can see that we get sorely tested sometimes, especially when it comes to our children, especially, you know, who are mean and horrible and ugly and have rejected us, but we still manage to try and love them, which is incredible. So the enemy is a person who doesn't do what your attachment wants. And the third one is called stranger. And what's that? That's a person who neither harms nor helps you. So how do you feel about the person you've got attachment for? You adore them and love them. How do you feel about the person who doesn't do what attachment wants? You hate them or have anger and aversion to them, depending on how strong. And then the third one, for the person who neither harms you or helps you, which is 99.999% of the universe, how do you feel about them? You couldn't care less. They could drop dead and you won't even notice. You know? This is fact. This is the universe. Look at the ants, the monkeys, the dogs, the humans. This is universal. And this is what's interesting about Buddhist psychology. It doesn't just refer to us humans. It refers to every single being in the universe, from the hell realms to the gods. It's Buddha's view of the universe. It's fascinating. Even all the realms of existence are in terms of these three main delusions, you know. It's an amazing system, model of the mind. So the point is here, we do have love and compassion, but only for the first group. So then what we're trying to do is get some equanimity here, and we're trying to get basically, and even as we're talking, you can do this. These types of meditations, you're using your creative imagination, and you're using logic basically to argue with ego's ridiculous misconceptions. That's what you're doing in these meditations, using very clear logic, which is surprising to us because we think a meditation on compassion is meant to make you all kind of gooey. No, that's just rubbish. Got to use logic to smash ego's ridiculous misconceptions. So equanimity, the way, even as we're talking, kind of have in front of you right now, eyeball to eyeball, a person you don't like, right in front of you, the object of your aversion, an enemy. You don't have to hate them to call them that. Even a person at work who just irritates you. In your family, one of your aunties, you don't like her voice. You don't want to be near her. You kind of avoid her. That's called an enemy. It's an enemy. That's a person you don't like. Or if it's a person who really you do hate, who really has harmed you, put them there. Up to you, as we're talking, right in front of you, eyeball to eyeball. To the left in front of you, have your beloved. And I know that they can turn into the enemy next every minute as well. I realize that. To have a different person. And to the right, have a stranger, which is a person whose face you're familiar enough with to put them there, but really you've got no interaction with them. So there's no relationship. So it's so clear, isn't it? So, okay, what we're trying to do is get to see how these three are the same as each other, which at the moment is like a joke. To think, especially if you're in love with somebody right now, or you have the most divine baby in the planet. Every mother believes their baby is the perfect baby. And that's just as far. I mean, I'm glad my mother had attachment for me. She would have killed me otherwise. So attachment can be useful, especially for mums, with the crazy kids. So if you've got this divine child or your grandchild, put them to the left in front of your beloved, Then put in the middle maybe, the mean, ugly, smelly old kid next door whom you can't stand. And then put a third one to the right, a stranger. Now, look how different they appear. You can't help stop thinking about your beloved child. When you look at them, they're divine, even if it's your grandchild, whoever, they look so gorgeous, you adore them, you want to think about them all the time. The next door kid is ugly and mean, you want to think about him. And the stranger, just boring. You don't want to look there. We can see how we are. We're like this. And the more we have attachment, like I say, you're going to go to a party and you're in love with somebody and you're expecting them to be there. And you walk in the door and you're like a vampire watching, where's your beloved? And you suddenly see there's no beloved. Everybody looks so ugly, you wish you'd all go away because they're not your beloved, We really can see our minds. Attachment means we're thinking about that person or that object all the time. It's like So anyway, so attachment and anger and indifference. They're so huge for us now. We mightn't be that violent. We mightn't hate many people. We mightn't even have many beloveds, but we can see the difference in our mind. The people who make us happy, the people we like, we go towards, people who we don't like, who irritate us, and the people we're just bored by, Attachment, aversion, and ignorance. So, of course, these three states of mind inform our behavior. It's so obvious. It's so clear. So we're trying to do, so in this as we're talking, what we're trying to do is get ourselves out of the equation, try to put these three separate people in front of us and try to get a sense of being separate from them. There's these three people. So one simple, like a silly, like an example I use to try and think about it. Let's say, it's just an example I use. There's a person who's a stranger. Because the person who is your beloved now, they were a stranger at one point. The person whom you hate now was also a stranger at one point. And this is the point now. So and especially we can go through the whole three. So there's a person who's a stranger. Let's say, Fred is a stranger. I only know about him because you tell me he's a bloke down the road. And you tell me that this fellow down the road, Fred, he gets terrible migraines. He's your friend. And I hear it. You're my friend. And I'm listening about poor Fred. I go, who, Fred? Oh, that's the bloke down the road. Oh, yeah, I know him. Oh, yeah, I've seen his face. But I hear he gets migraines. Well, I try to be compassionate, don't I? I talk about it for a second. But after a while, I'll say, pass the tea and we'll keep our conversation going. Because he's a stranger. It's not moving me very much. He's a stranger. I mean, I know we do feel bad for strangers. We read the news. But once we've read the news and it's gone, we forget about it. We go back to our friends again. So we can see we've got some semblance of compassion. But in general, a stranger is a person. I've never met Fred. He's not a person for me. I vaguely remember his face. So what does that mean? I don't care that much. Now, let's say I meet Fred and we fall in love and he moves me in. Now look at me. This is the point here. 1 minute, I hear about his migraines and I don't much care. Now I'm in love with Fred and he's in love with me. Now look at me. Look at the level of compassion I've suddenly got for Fred. Unbelievable compassion, unbelievable love. I spend my money on him. I stay up all night trying to help him, drive him to the hospital, do everything I can, look on the internet, find methods to help poor Fred and his migraines. I think about him all the time. Oh, Robina's so compassionate. Isn't it? We understand that. Well, look at the difference. And now let's say Fred gets fed up with me and throws me out. And now he becomes an enemy. So first he was a stranger. I couldn't care about his migraines. Now when he became a friend, I was so overwhelmed with love and compassion for Fred and his migraines. And then now he's thrown me out. I hope he suffers with his migraines. Don't I? We get this. So the point is very simple. If you ask Fred when he was my stranger, how are your headaches? He will tell you they were unbearable. When you ask him how are his headaches when he was my beloved, he will tell you they were unbearable. And when you ask him when he's my enemy, how are your headaches? He will tell you they're unbearable. So the headaches for the friend and the enemy and the stranger are exactly the same for each one. But I see those three people through the lenses of my needs. And if Fred, when he's a stranger, when the stranger neither harms nor helps me, I'm not affected. I don't care. When he's my beloved, I can't stop thinking about him day and night, and I care terribly. And when he's my enemy, I hope he suffers with his headaches. Get the point. So all I'm trying to do here is get us out of the equation. And this is how we all are. We put these labels onto people. We put labels onto people. And if you think about it, another way to do this is reverse the thing. And there's you here, and there's three people out there. The three different people in your life right now. One, you look to the left, and there's your beloved, who when they look at you, and you can see when they look at you, they just think you're divine. Then the person in front of you, like your ex-boyfriend perhaps, or the person at work who just doesn't like you. You can see by looking into their eyes, they don't like you. They see a mean person. And look at the stranger to the right, the person at work whose face you know just enough. And they look at you, they hardly even look at you because you don't exist. In other words, for those three people, you are for one a beloved, for one of them an enemy, and for one a boring stranger. So if each of them wrote a description of you, you wouldn't recognize those three descriptions because they're seeing you through the lenses of their needs. The one who thinks you're gorgeous is because you're fulfilling their attachment. They think you're divine. The one who doesn't like you, you're not fulfilling their attachment's needs. They think you're ugly. And the stranger, because you're not fulfilling any of their needs, they just find you boring. Now, they're not true stories. They're seeing you through their own projections. Well, that's what we do to the entire universe. And the three main projections here are the projection of friend, enemy, and stranger, which are the objects of attachment, aversion, and indifference. It's so evident, but because the whole universe does it, we take it for granted. And Buddha says it's completely neurotic. It's completely limited. So what we're trying to do here in this series of techniques that culminate in bodhicitta is we're trying to have love and compassion for every one of them equally. Well, this is the first argument you have to use to find fault in the delusion's misconceptions. You can't force yourself to love Mr. Weinstein. Even more, this is coming as a result of the wisdom work. So you can't begin to see Mr. Weinstein in any other eyes than the eyes of aversion if he's not fulfilling your attachment's needs. You read about the monster he is and what he does and all these jumps on these women and lies and harms and manipulates and is angry and brutal. You can't possibly begin to see him in any other way. It's not possible until you've understood attachment, aversion, and ignorance way back in the beginning and now in this meditation. So then you're going to start to realize, and this is what the hardest point of all, and then you think, well, if they're all equal, you mean you're telling me that Mr. Weinstein wants to be happy? And we're not moved by that because we're trying to see that he is equal in his wish to be happy with your beloved child who hasn't at the moment hurt a fly. Your child is innocent and divine and hasn't hurt anybody and is beautiful and is loving and is compassionate and is sweet. And then you think, you mean Mr. Weinstein is equal to my beloved in his wish to be happy and not suffer? But we think, what am I supposed to do with that? Then I'm supposed to think, well, Mr. Weinstein wants to be happy. What am I supposed to do with that? Because it's too hard to get past your own projections of this monster. And then the first thing we will say is he doesn't deserve to be happy. In other words, right, using the example of Fred, let's say, Fred was my friend and now he's thrown me out and now he's my enemy. And someone tells me, Robina, but he wants to be happy. I'll be outraged. What do you mean he wants to be happy? He doesn't deserve to be happy, because that's how we think. We're only prepared that our beloveds want to be happy because they deserve it. But Mr. Weinstein and our ex-boyfriend, they don't deserve it. So we think, what are you talking about? What do you mean he wants to be happy? What am I supposed to feel with that? This is the point. We're supposed to get beyond enemy, friend, and stranger labels because they're artificial. They're artificial labels. But then we say, well, what do you mean it's artificial? Fred was mean to me. He did cheat on me. He did abuse me. What do you mean it's artificial? It's real that he harmed me. Well, Buddha's not arguing with that. That's not the issue here too. That's another point that's really shocking. The logic for us right now for why I hate Fred is because he harmed me. We think that's the perfect logic of the universe. Buddha says that's just completely self-centered. I mean, this is too shocking. This is just equanimity. There's 11 steps to go before we get to bodhicitta. This is shocking. The logic is too hard for our minds. That's why you haven't done some wisdom wing work, haven't understood karma, which means you know, and with karma, you know why Mr. Weinstein does what he does. You know why he went and raped you because you understand karma. You got that as a basis for understanding, and you understand your own delusions and attachment and aversion, how they cause suffering. So that's your basis, first of all, to even understand Mr. Weinstein. And then you realize you get past your own projections. It's really intense work, this. It's too hard for our minds, you know. And it needs logic. It's not just sentimental, gooey feelings. Oh, everyone's equal. Wow. Not like that. You've got to have logic. So what do you think, you people? Ask me some questions now, okay?
No questions have come through, but if anyone has any, they can unmute and ask Venerable.
I was just going to ask Venerable, would this be something one could use? Sorry, it's Kitty again. It's Kitty.
Oh, I see you, Katie. Go, talk to me.
Would this be something that one could use in light of the Black Lives Matter and racism? And because I assume when Buddha practiced, they didn't have the problem of other cultures, did they? I don't know. Do they have? Is this a tool for racism?
That's not the point, Kitty. Buddha's talking about the mind. So whether it's 5,000 years ago or whether it's in a little country village in the middle of nowhere, everybody in the universe, including all the animals and all the spirits and all the beings and all the gods, have got all these delusions. So they're all the delusions at the point. They mightn't be as dramatic as now. Maybe the delusions are rampant right now with much more vivid, just, you know, groups of different people and more extreme suffering. But the delusions are exactly the same. Otherwise, how would Buddha have known about them when he talked about them 2,500 years ago? So what's your question?
Could someone use that meditation to allow them to see someone for who they are as opposed to their skin color, like just to be someone who could just look into someone's eyes and see them 100% as equal? Could that be a tool for someone who felt?
What are you thinking? What I've just discussed, how would you say you would apply it? I mean,
I'd say yes. I'd say yes. Yes, it would be something that someone could use.
Would apply it. So give me an example.
Well, because they would feel that anyone that comes before them is equal to everyone in the world and equal to themselves and deserves the right to be happy. Has the right to be happy.
I know, but right now we're talking these are very specific states of mind. You said a few other things then. Equal to yourself, that comes 5 steps later in these 11 points. The first thing we're trying to establish is really specific. That a person who is gorgeous, a person who you think is ugly, and a person you think is boring are equal in their wish to be happy and not suffer. That's the specific meaning of equanimity here. That's what you use.
Yeah.
Do you understand?
Thank
what
you.
That implies, like I said, is we can see that we're putting labels onto people, and the reason those labels are there are based on my needs. So if a person fulfills my needs, that I call them a friend. If the person doesn't fulfill my needs, whether it's they've got the wrong skin color, or they talk too loud, or they're too fat, whatever the label is, we might think, it's therefore we have aversion for them. So we see them in a different way. And the other one is boring. A person who neither harms me nor helps me appears boring to me, and I don't care. So we don't care about strangers. We have aversion for enemies, and we have attachment to friends. That's the logic behind it, to understand why we do see these 3 different kinds of people. That's the analysis to do. So yes, it's really important. But again, I think the next step though, Kitty, and this is what I want to talk about now, is what we then think, like I said about Mr. Weinstein, what do I say, okay, Mr. Weinstein wants to be happy, just like my beloved child, but we don't know what that means yet. We don't know what am I supposed to do with that? And the natural feeling we have, like the discussion yesterday we had, was, oh, the poor thing, there we go, oh, the poor Mr. Weinstein, he can't help it. So we pat him on the head. But that's not the issue here. It's to try to get past attachment and aversion, to get to see that Mr. Weinstein, even though he is maybe a naughty person, and your little beloved child isn't a naughty person, they're facts. They're not argued with this point. They are facts. And that, so we get beyond that and recognize in their bones, every one of them wants to be happy. And that's all we're trying to establish here. Not trying to establish that Mr. Weinstein is really a saint. So it's a very, each of these steps is very precise. Do you understand, Kitty?
Yep, thank you.
Thanks, Venerable. We have one more question.
Yeah, good.
Can you help anyone with their delusions, or can they only help themselves, given the limitations of our understanding of the mind?
Well, if you've only studied one day of acupuncture, then you can only help a person to that degree, can't you? And if you studied acupuncture for 40 years, you're very qualified. But still, all you can do is do the diagnosis. You can, by looking at them, you can understand their illness, you can give them advice, but in the end, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Same here. The more you understand your mind, the more you understand the mind of another. But if they don't want your advice, then you can't help them, can you? So this is a very powerful point when it comes to what compassion means. You know, this is a really powerful one, actually. If we look into the way we are now with our attachment, let's say you've got your beloved brother is an alcoholic, just a simple example. And you adore your brother. You know, you've known him since he was born. You adore the man. You know, you love him. You have compassion for him. But over the years, you've observed he's got this intense attachment, and you can see clearly how he's causing himself suffering. It's really evident to you. But what is that? This is the problem here with compassion, when we haven't worked enough on our own mind. Because if you can't distinguish between your own attachment, and this is very powerful here. So what I'm getting at here is this. Attachment, you see, is this hunger in us that essentially just wants only everything to be nice. The bottom line with attachment is it wants everything to be nice. It's like this junkie in us that is frantic to only get the nice things. Try and hear this. And that means the right cake, the right sound, the right smell, the right taste, the right event. Everything has to be perfect. Attachment is very fragile, and it's a junkie. And we can see, and this is back in the wisdom wing work, as soon as our attachment doesn't get what it wants, as soon as you meet the wrong noise, the wrong sound, the wrong word, we get upset. That's called anger. Okay, so this is what happens. But so here you are, you've got your brother, you love him, you have attachment to him, you have attachment to him, but also you have attachment to make everything lovely. So as soon as your brother starts to drink and get alcohol, get drunk, you hear about the things he does, he comes home, he vomits in the soup, he makes mum and dad unhappy. So your attachment is really offended. You don't like to see this. We don't look at this. We don't notice this. We don't think like this. This attachment in us is really upset. We think about the brother. We wish he wasn't like it. But at the same time, along with that attachment to get what I want and make everything lovely, I also do have compassion for him. But what I'm not noticing is my attachment is polluting my compassion. It drags my compassion down. That's why we stick our nose in his business. That's why we talk about him behind his back. We worry about him and we think we're being so kind. No, because our attachment's freaking out. It can't cope. But then that makes our compassion limited. So we barge in, we give him advice, we tell him where to go, we say, yes, go to AA, do this, do that. We stick our nose in. We haven't noticed that he doesn't want to hear our advice. And then he tells us to go mind our own business and we get upset. So that's not because we have compassion for him. We think it's because we've got compassion. We think we worry about him because we've got compassion. No, you worry about him because you've got attachment. I mean, look at our mothers. Mothers, oh, I release because I love you, but they're in our faces every minute, our darling mummies, because they're full of attachment. So we've got to distinguish between attachment, and that's subdue that in the first level. So here, then if you've got less attachment and you realize he's upsetting you, but you keep it calm, you know it's his problem. You recognize he does not want to hear your advice. So you mind your own business. You love him for who he is. You're there for him. And if you see a chance, you will give him advice. But you can only advise him to the extent that he wants to hear your advice. And if you can't see that, don't have that wisdom, that's why you make a mess in your relationships. So that's the degree to which you can help another is one, the degree to which you know your mind. And two, the degree to which they allow you to help them. And that's your wisdom that you have to develop. And maybe we can never help some people, but you have to have the wish to help them every second. That's what love is, and compassion, and never give up. But that's why Dalai Lama says compassion is not enough. You need wisdom. And wisdom is what you get to the degree that you lessen your own neuroses. You get more clear. You see more clearly what is going on. This is hugely important. That's why, again, the wisdom wing has to come first. There's another question there, wasn't there?
There is. I've just posted for you. So, Venerable, is it okay to point out that what you just discussed with friend, enemy, and stranger is not just a way of explaining equanimity, but it's actually it is the meditation. Is that correct? That practice of seeing a friend, enemy, and stranger, that's the process of the meditation. It's not just a way of discussing equanimity. Is that right?
You're asking me that.
I'm asking you that.
Oh, I see. Well, it's the same. I mean, all I'm doing is talking about it casually.
Yeah.
I'm describing the different thoughts that we need to cultivate to understand it. But you would do that in a more formal way. That's how you would use, if you understand that, you would use that thinking in your meditation. You just close your eyes and do it more intensively. I mean, what we just did was a meditation, but more casual.
Wonderful. Meditation,
familiarize your mind with it. So you'd visualize those three people and you'd go through each one and use logic, that some of the logic I've just brought up, to try to use that logic yourself to argue with your own view, but in a more quiet, contemplative way. It's the same thing though. There's no difference.
Wonderful. And that leads to the question that is, what if in the meditation, friend, enemy, and stranger are the same person?
Well, you wouldn't do it. It's just foolish. You wouldn't do it. I use the example of Fred as an interesting example to show how we're ridiculous, but you wouldn't do that. It's not the point. It's not going to be helpful. Well, it could be helpful if you adored your husband and then you hate him now. It wouldn't, and that is helpful. Now that would be helpful. If let's say it would be helpful. It could be helpful. But the bigger issue is to see the whole world is divided into these three categories. And when you know it from the whole world, then you can understand it. In other words, if when I adored you, I only wanted you to be happy. And now just because you've gone against me, I want you to be suffering. So yes, absolutely, it will help you get the logic that it's just not logical. That's just because my attachment has been thwarted. So you're the same person. The person, you're exactly the same person. When I loved you and you adoring me, I knew you wanted to be happy. But now because you've given me up, you have to be the same. So yes, it can be very helpful, a way to help us break down our aversion for the person we used to love. Yeah, for sure. It can be very powerful. In other words, let's say Fred left me and you say to me, Robina, well, he did want to be happy. That's why he left you. I mean, it's so painful. You can't bear to think about it, but that's true. The only reason Fred left me because he wants to be happy. Okay, he might be deluded, but we do everything because we want to be happy. Mr. Weinstein craves to be happy, but he doesn't realize that jumping on other women and being abusive is not the method to get happy. And that's really the fundamental point. Everybody is driven. We're all driven by the wish only to feel good, but we don't understand the methods. We think eating and sleeping and going to the toilet and having sex and drugs and killing people is the method. And Buddha's trying to say, no, guys, wrong method. So yes. What else, people?
I'll try and word for word. Could you please explain how our cognitive fusion of the person, friend, enemy, or stranger with their good or bad actions can confuse us in our relationships and our interactions with others?
I wish who asked that question? Can you tell me, please say it another way? Who asked that? Unless you want to be private.
It was sent privately, but I've posted it. I'll see if they come through with more.
Graham.
Oh, Graham, good on you. Ask me the question another way.
From Peter a couple of years ago.
Good. Happy to see you.
Great to be here.
In a different way, Graham.
Well, cognitive fusion, I did a course early this year in February with Len Svensson. You probably know him or heard of him. I do know him. Yes, he's my friend. Yeah, and Glenn was explaining in his course, which was, I think, compassion and something else as well, was like an eight-day retreat and at Genresic. And he was explaining that one of the big problems we have is we confuse the actions of people or anything with their deeds. And what we should be more, and that leads to a lot of confusion. We say there are bad people and good people, whereas when you get rid of that concept of cognitive fusing the person with the deed, and you say what the person did was a terrible thing, a murder or a rape.
Okay, I understand.
No,
that's a good point. And it's very good. It's a good point.
Person is not necessarily a bad person. They're different from us. It's just that they've done something wrong.
I remember the Christians have a lovely way of putting it. Don't criticize the sinner, criticize the sin. It's exactly the same point. But you know what, Graham? I think it's a really important point. This is the work we have to do for ourselves, on ourselves at the first stages of practice. This is where we have this view. I mean, this is the irony of attachment. You see, the irony of attachment is its dissatisfaction. From the practice of past lives, masses of attachment, we come into this life and the default assumption is I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not intelligent enough, I'm too angry, I'm this. We obsess with our negativity. So of course we say, I am angry, I am that kind of person. We do it to ourselves first. Once we start working on ourselves, it's easy to do it for others. This is exactly our problem. We all have this self-loathing, you know, this self-hate. I am a bad person. And that's why when we talked briefly yesterday, when we did the purification, just very briefly, the last 10 minutes, and we go with the first step of regret. When you say, I did this and I killed my father and I did that and I was angry and I was jealous and I was depressed, the natural conclusion to that is, I am a bad person. And that's exactly what we do, Graham. And this is exactly the way ego grasping, the root delusion, functions. We identify according to whether we're good or bad. I'm a good person, I'm an intelligent person, I'm an ugly person. That's the big mistake. And what's wonderful, when you hear the way that the Tibetans, and it must be the Indian style as well, they talk about the states of mind more objectively. There is anger, there is love, there is kindness, there is jealousy. We have to identify the different parts of our mind and don't say, I am angry, but there is anger. And this also helps us get to understand emptiness, because what we're doing when we say, I'm angry, I'm bad, he is angry, he's bad, is we're over-identifying, we're concretizing the very sense of a person. That's the big problem. So yes, it's very powerful not to do that and to allow ourselves just to observe the different parts of our mind and recognize with courage and sincerity the different parts are there and see that that's what's causing me suffering and have much more compassion for ourselves. Then it's easy for sure to do it for other people.
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea of the innocent victim versus the evil person or the neutral person is, I think, tied up in this attitude. We think if someone did something which is bad, they're evil, whereas someone does something good, they're a good person. But of course, there's an infinite.
And that's really a function of the root delusion, ego grasping. So it's really important when, like, if you see Mr. Weinstein, yes, or Mr. Trump, you know, yes, Mr. Trump does lie, he does steal, he does do this, he does do that, but his person, and that's why it's so important to hear about Buddha nature. Every single being has Buddha nature. Everyone has the potential to be a Buddha. And these are just these different things painted on top of the person. But the crucial one is we should do it for ourselves first and get much more clarity about our own self. Then it's easy to have it for other people. You understand that?
Yeah.
Yes, doesn't it? It's a really good point. Yeah. So someone else, please. Any more questions? Okay,
yes, I have a question from YouTube from Trish McGuire. She says, thank you. And some of us can witness and change. Other of us have to experience and change.
Where are you, Rain?
Oh, she's on YouTube.
Where is you? I can't see you.
Oh, you can't see me?
I got the Vajrayana. The
I'm back.
Go on. Say it again.
From Trish McGuire. Some of us can witness, then change. Others of us have to experience, then change. It seems that every 6 to 7 generations.
Start again, please. What Trish said. Start again.
Some of us can witness, then change. Others of us have to experience, then change. It seems that every 6 to 7 generations, we have to repeat ignorant behaviors. Is this simply due to a lack of first-hand experience that needs to be reaffirmed?
Trish, I wish I could talk to you, but I can't, can I? You're on YouTube.
I've sent her a link to join us on YouTube, on Zoom. So
I know. So, I mean, Trish, I mean, I can't think, the Buddhist approach very much is thinking on an individual level, not so much on a historical level. Because, I mean, history, meaning, okay, say the question again, slowly.
It's easier to read. I've posted it. Otherwise, I'll try one more time.
Say it one more time. Read it slowly. Some of us can witness, then change. Stop right there. Stop right there. What do you mean by witness? Oh, you mean so somebody
Something
can
and
see
change.
can see it as a learning and can learn from it. Okay, some people then go on.
And then others need to experience it
What does
and
it
change.
and change? Well, then, before you go any further, let's just look at those 2 points. Somebody can witness something and then change. So in other words, I look at Mr. Trump and I go, oh my God, there's Mr. Trump, he's lying. And then I go, thank you for showing me how not to be. I recognize lying and then I make a decision to stop lying. That sounds like a first example. But what about the experience one? You mean I have to experience my own lies first? That seems.
Or someone lying to you, maybe directly.
I don't know. I can't understand that second point. But in general, the point here is, in general, the Buddhist approach is the stronger our habit. You see, this is the thing about, often we talk about how, you talk about history. We can see in history that we don't seem to, as a people, we don't seem to learn. We don't seem to, all the time people talk about learning from history, learning from history, learning from history. But the Buddhist point is you'll never learn from history until you learn it in yourself. It's got to be in yourself. It was always someone else's mistakes. Look at what history is doing. And because we're not recognizing the real reason is because we've got attachment and anger and the delusions. And in the first step, you can't go anywhere until you learn about your own delusions. You can see delusions about the outside world until the cows come home. But until you recognize they are my delusions, and indeed until you experience them yourself, nothing will ever change. That's the essential point. That's the real point. I hope that helps. Do you want to have a 5-minute break again?
Wonderful.
See you in 5 minutes.
Thanks, Venerable.
Thank you, Tom. Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Does anyone have any issues, tech problems, anything like that? Let me know in the chat. Otherwise, I'll see you in 5 minutes.
Thanks, Craig.
Okay, I'm back. Everyone, hello.
Welcome. We had a question in the break, Venerable.
All right, are you there, Rain?
My video, yeah, there we
Okay,
are.
darling. So any more questions there?
Yes, one came through. It asks, what are some ways we can counter and
Can't hear you, darling. Yeah, go on.
Is that better?
Your volume must be turned down, Rain. I can't hear you.
Hello? Can anyone else hear me? No.
Can't hear you.
Oh, Venerable, maybe yours.
Can't hear any of you.
I can hear you just fine,
Wait a
right?
minute. Oh, my volume is turned down. That's what.
No worries.
I can hear you now.
The question is, what are some ways we can counter and start to change the self-loathing or the voice of attachment that says, I'm not enough or I'm a terrible person?
Yes, exactly. I remember Lama Yeshe said one time, I could tell you about attachment for one whole year and you will never begin to understand it until we start practicing, which means we've got to first hear it. So when we realize this is the deepest disease, I mean, this is a deep mental illness we have. And the Buddha's explanation is because we've practiced attachment before. So it's hard to see the logic of that. So let's try and analyze the logic. Why would it be that because of always wanting something more, why does that cause us to think I'm nothing and nobody and hate ourselves? Well, it's called the disease of attachment, the consequence of always wanting something more. The consequence of attachment is always attachment. Attachment is on the basis of thinking I haven't got enough, which is already is the low. I am not enough. I do not have enough. No matter what I get, it's not enough. That's what it already thinks. So then naturally, because you feel, and so, okay, then why do you feel you haven't got enough? Because you've tried getting something before that you thought would be enough for you, but because attachment's a lie, It's like, you see, it's like you think of the $5. You're convinced that $5 is 50. So you believe this lie that it's worth more than it is. So then you go to spend it. So because of your attachment, you over anticipate what you're going to get. You're excited, you're projecting, you're anticipating, you look forward to it, you go to spend it, and you only get $5. So what's the consequence? You're disappointed. You're disappointed, you go crashing down, then you forget it, and then you try it again. And we've been doing this, Buddha says, for eons, in countless realms of existence. And this is the motor that runs all of us. And there's this, and in other words, we believe totally in something that doesn't exist. And this attachment is so primordial. So the more we've practiced it in the past, the more we come into this life with the consequence of deep primordial dissatisfaction. And the irony is, those of us born into this world of delicious things, we have the virtue. Because of virtue in the past, because of generosity, we have got beautiful food and beautiful clothing and beautiful things and lots of money in comparison with some cultures. So that's because of our virtue. But we also come into this life with unbelievable dissatisfaction. So as my mother used to say to me with food, the more you get, the more you want. So that's the point about attachment. It causes us to believe that when I get that food, I will become satisfied. And this is why we have to do the analysis of attachment. This is scientific logic, but it's hard to hear it. So what happens is this. I'm feeling dissatisfied. Why? Because I've tried to get satisfied by getting cake and food in the past, but it doesn't bring it. So every time I get the food, it makes me more hungry. So then I've got attachment again. The habit is there. I'm feeling dissatisfied, and the particular attachment is food. So I see the food, and what attachment does is make it look more delicious than it really is, like the $50. So I get all excited and I anticipate. I forgot my yesterday's experience because we're addicted to it. It's addiction. Attachment's addiction. So I try again. I'm feeling dissatisfied. I see the cake out on the plate. It looks totally divine. And I'm making it look divine. Attachment makes it look divine. It's a lie. And the more divine it looks, the more hungry I am and frantic to have contact with it. So I get the cake and I put it in the mouth. So then what happens is it will trigger a pleasant feeling, which is called happiness. It will trigger pleasant feeling. That's logical. But you've got to ask the question, why is that feeling not enough? This is the question to ask. And the first mouthful is always the best. You're not going to get better than that, but we forget. So what happens is, because we're still a junkie, the first mouthful, which is so delicious, which is a pleasant feeling, which is exactly what you wanted, but you're still not satisfied. You want it again. And you think that the next piece will be even better, but we know it's downhill from there. So you try a second piece and you try a third piece. And as that process goes, this constant dissatisfaction, believing the cake will make me happy, it does trigger happiness, but we're not satisfied with it. So you've got to have another piece. And then by the time you get to the third piece, and you've missed this now, you start to realize that you're not, that the pleasure is diminishing. There's not the same pleasure anymore because your stomach is getting fuller and the cake is looking rather jaded by now. And you keep trying, thinking maybe the next mouthful will do it. And you have another piece. And before you know it, if you have a third, fourth piece, you would vomit. So what's happened to the pleasure? It's gone like a dream. The cake did bring you a happy feeling, but you weren't satisfied with that happy feeling. So you wanted another happy feeling. And that's the function of attachment. No matter what you get, it's never enough. So it's this nightmare. And by the time you end up, now what's happened, the cake is, half the cake is on the plate. It now looks completely repulsive to you. You're feeling stuffed. And the only feeling that comes now is revolting. It's a pleasure of disgusting. If you ate more cake, you would vomit. And that's the way we get happiness on the basis of attachment. And that's why we all go mad. That's why we get depressed. That's why we get angry. That's why we get jealous, because attachment is a stinking, lousy, rotten lie that we've been addicted to believing in for eons, Buddha says. And what it brings, as my mother said, the more you get, not only does getting the cake not bring fulfillment, it actually causes you to crave even more cake. That's what a junkie is. An attachment is the mind of a junkie. And so the more we try to get the happiness from that cake and whatever else the object is, the more distress we get. And that's why we all go crazy. So I don't know if we recognize any of that, but that's a Buddhist analysis of why we suffer.
Question. Can you please explain how we apply equanimity to other sentient beings we encounter, like ants or mice?
Same as before, same as I said before. Exactly the same as the logic of equanimity. I mean, those, especially the mice and the rats and the cockroaches, ones we put into the enemy category. I mean, as if it's your cute little poodle or your little kind of goldfish or something, you know, then we have attachment to it and we think they're gorgeous and we cry when they suffer, we cry when they die. But we don't have that for the cockroaches. We're happy when they die. So it's exactly the same argument. A cockroach, this is where if you think about, okay, you've got to do an analysis. If you have the analysis of why Mr. Trump is the way he is, if you have the analysis of why a cockroach is the way they are, then you'll understand the person. And also, this is, you know, the point that what's his name made before about, you know, the person. The cockroach is a sentient being just like your beloved poodle. You know, that divine person you're in love with is exactly the same person in their mind as Mr. Weinstein or some monster rapist. And due to karma, they've developed those habits, like this dressing. They've got the dressing of bad habits. So we identify the person by the dressing, you know. There's an evil creature. So the cockroach, there's one kind of, so the karma that's called experiences similar to the cause, which is the karma of how you're seen and treated by other people. So think of your own life. Some people don't like you. So they're mean to you and it's so painful. So can you imagine being born a cockroach? The karma of a cockroach is mainly, they're just as hungry or just as neurotic as your poodle. Your poodle is just as neurotic as the cockroach. It's got attachment too, but the poodle has some karma from being a kind person in the past to be seen as beautiful by you. But a cockroach, due to their very heavy negative karma of being very unkind in the past, just anyone has to see a cockroach and they want to smash it immediately. Can you imagine the heavy duty negative karma that poor cockroach must have created? So in that way, you can see the way the cockroach appears to you and the way your poodle appears to you, the way the ugly Mr. Trump appears to you, but the way your friend appears to you, that's due to their karma, and you see them in that particular way, and also because of your delusions. So when you realize it's just karmic appearance, as Lama Zopa says, everything is just our karmic appearance. Due to our karma with each other, we see each other in a certain way, we buy into that story, we never question it. But when you understand karma back in junior school, this gives you the ability to analyze how all these people aren't in their bones cockroaches or rapists or terrorists. They've all got Buddha nature, they all want to be happy, they all don't want to suffer, and due to their karma, they do these heavy duty things. So you get beyond all those superficial labels and you start to see the real person. And then on the basis of wisdom, you'll know how to help them. So you don't go and love you don't go and kind of pat a cockroach on the head. It doesn't want patting on the head. You don't go and say, oh, poor Mr. Trump can't help it. No, you put him in prison if you have to, but you'll understand why they do it. You'll understand why they appear ugly to you, and you won't believe in your karmic appearances. That's why you've got to do the wisdom wing first. This is the kind of thinking we have to do.
That's great. How do we work with attachment if we are sick of suffering? Do we just try and appreciate the first mouthful and not expect more?
I mean, that's just similar to the last person's question when I tried to give the description of what attachment is. It's not an easy job. It's an incredibly hard job. That's why we've got to work really slowly on ourselves. And that's why the very first level of practice, you can't even begin to work on the attachment because it's so intensive. Just like it's, you know, think a good example. If you're an alcoholic, which just means you've got strong attachment for a certain object called alcohol. We're all got some kind of addiction, but we don't call it addiction in our culture. But it's all addiction. It's just a question of degree and a question of the object. So we can see with the extreme examples of attachment to alcohol, let's say, you know, so the obvious thing is it would be absurd to ask a person who is totally addicted to alcohol to continue to drink alcohol at the same time as trying to give up attachment to it. No, what a joke. So as your question implied, that's why the first level of practice, don't worry about your mind yet, just control the servants of your mind, which is you control your hand and your speech. So if you've got the habit to go put the hand onto the chocolate cake, Keep your hand in your lap. And of course it's painful. I mean, it's outrageously painful to give up alcohol. It's outrageously painful to give up any habit because the junkie in us is so desperate, whether it's a cigarette, whether it's eating, whether it's jumping on girls 20 times a day, whatever the habit you've got. I mean, many people I know have this addiction to video games. I mean, it's a complete, utter, unbearable craving. It's just like being an alcoholic. 3, 4, 5 hours a day, addicted to it. Think about it all the time. That's what attachment is. If you think about something when it's not there, that's the sign you're attached to it. You crave it. You need it to be there. And it can be the mildest thing, like picking up your iPhone and checking your emails for the 47th time. So it's really hard. The first level is discipline your hands. Forget your speech yet. Just discipline your hand. And that demands a very powerful decision of your mind, not to work on the attachment, but to work on the hand going to the iPhone, going to the cake, going to the video game. It is an intensely difficult practice. And that's the first level of practice that the Buddha recommends to us. It's profound. And that's why we need to live in vows. Because vows are like atomic bombs on delusions. Living in vows helps us create virtuous karma 24 hours a day. So the very first level of practice, at least don't kill, don't rape, don't steal, don't lie. You know, they're the heaviest ones that harm others really badly. At least those you begin to control. And then the one like alcohol or any of our objects of attachment like food, the ones we put into our mouth. This is one of our strongest attachments, all of us, you know. So it's really intense practice. And don't have any fantasy expectations you'll give up attachment overnight. You don't really give up attachment until you realize emptiness. It's the heaviest one. So you've got long-term perspective. And the other one is, you know, learning about attachment, always dissatisfied, running to the default assumption it's not enough, I'm not enough. Yes, also practice changing your script. It won't help, it won't work overnight. But as Lama Yeshe says, learn to be satisfied now. And that's so painful. Yes, learn to be satisfied with one piece of cake, even though your mind's hungrily wanting the second one. But it's not, you won't feel satisfied immediately, you'll feel very distressed. But practice makes perfect. So yes. And that's why more and more you control your hand, you use your mind to say no, one piece of cake. And eventually you get used to it. Eventually it won't be so painful. So it's hard work. It's called discipline. But the key thing is, because attachments are quick, wants it fixed right now. We want the pleasant feeling right now. You got to delay that. You know, when you go to the gym, if you think you're going to the gym to come back home the first day and look divine in the mirror, you'll be very disappointed. You'll look just as fat and ugly and you'll feel terrible. But you've got to know the benefit of the gym. You've got to be prepared to go the suffering and to visualize the end result of nice, gorgeous looking you. The same here. And that's why doing the practices like in Tantra, like visualizing Tara, visualizing Ched Razig, where you visualize the end result of divine perfected you, it can be very encouraging to do those practices, you know. Are we communicating?
Thank you, Venerable. One from YouTube. How do you cultivate the ability to discern what really is helpful for another and what isn't?
That's a good question. And it's like I said before, if you have zero acupuncture, if you have 1 day's worth of acupuncture knowledge and you want to help me, you can't do more than you're capable of with your 1 day's knowledge. It's true, isn't it? So your ability to help me with health is limited by your knowledge. So if you do 2 days of knowledge, you've got 2 days worth of help to me. And if you're 27 years of acupuncture, you can be really helpful to me. So in terms of helping people now in the daily life, like your brother who's an alcoholic, or like your sister, or like a next door neighbor, you've got to have some wisdom. And that's what wisdom means. The more you know your mind, the more you know your attachment and your anger and your jealousy, you know why you suffer. The more you have that knowledge, when you see others, you go, oh my God, I recognize that. And you see the other person, why they're suffering. So your ability, so compassion is the wish to help me or someone else. The compassion in your mind is the wish to help somebody. But what makes you capable of helping them is not compassion, that's wisdom. So whether it's acupuncture knowledge or knowledge about your mind. So if you know your brother, you understand his attachment, you know why he's attached because you know your own, you've got the wisdom to know that he's not interested in your not interested in your advice, he's not asking you, and because you're not full of your own attachment to make it all lovely, you can see past your own nose, you know where he's at, and you're wise and you'll love him for who he is. And if he asks you advice one day, you will take the opportunity. So the ability to help others is the wish to help is compassion, but the ability to help is the knowledge you get. And that in these terms is knowing your own mind and understanding karma and understanding the mind. That's how you learn to know yourself. And that's exactly how you learn to know other people. It's exactly the same amount of knowledge. Yes. What else?
Yes, Francis, you're welcome to ask. Just unmute your microphone.
Yes, Francis, darling.
Hello, Robina. Can you hear me?
I can, absolutely.
So I am thinking of the difference between, a bit of a semantic question here, the difference between self-cherishing, self-love, and then self-appreciation without seeming to be up yourself when you're doing something compassionate for others.
So self-cherishing is a term they use in, certainly the Tibetan word, is actually meaning selfish.
Okay. Yeah.
Selfish means being self-centered. It means you've got lots of attachment. In other words, you're selfish when you're full of attachment, when you're full of your own needs and your own expectations and what I want this and I want that. We naturally become selfish and we put ourselves first and we end up harming others. So that we recognize, and that's because of attachment. But as we practice, and we can see, or whatever you're doing, even if you're learning to play the piano, you need to delight in your progress. You need to be, and this is where we often have so much self-hate. And that's where the more we often are never satisfied. And that's why we have to learn to be satisfied with that one piece of cake, but also learn to be satisfied that you're in grade 1. So what we go is, I'm only in grade 1. Then get to grade 2 in music. I'm only in grade 2. Then I get to grade 97. Well, I'm only in grade 97. You've got to learn to be happy that at each stage of your progress. And we don't know how to do that because we're addicted to thinking we're not good enough. So we have to change that. Right. See, that's not arrogance. Arrogance is overstating how good you are. That's a delusion. But we have low self-esteem, which is over-exaggerating how bad we are. And they're both the same problem. So we've got to be realistic. And if you have made progress and you are in grade 1, you delight in your progress. And that gives you the courage. By being satisfied with being in grade 1 doesn't mean you don't care to go to grade 2, but you delight in your progress. You delight each step of the way. And it's a really important practice. The Lamas call it rejoicing. But we just never do it. We just fall into the trap of, I'm not good enough. And we pretend it's humility. No, it's not. And so don't be scared of thinking you did a good job is called arrogance, because it's not. And this is where the key distinction, which we learn when we learn about the mind in high school, is that the delusions are demented and not very happy feeling, but the virtues have got a good feeling. So thinking you did a good job is very intelligent. That's not a delusion. But so over-exaggerating or under-exaggerating, they're delusions and they're not happy. Delusions are never happy, but a virtuous state of mind is a very spacious, appropriate state of mind. And we really need to learn to do that.
Good.
You understand?
Thank you.
Good, darling. Thank you, Francis. So people, okay, so this equanimity, like I'm saying, it's the first step. It's the foundation. It's the basis upon which you will then develop eventually in these different stages, love, compassion, which culminates in this thing that's called great compassion. And this is a really powerful one. It's not just like a nice word. It's an actual technical term. So, and this is the unique characteristic of the compassion of the Bodhisattva path, okay? So if you're on the Hinayana path, and that's junior school and high school, basically. And if you're on the Hinayana path, which is the Buddhism that's taught in Burma and Thailand, for example, then you graduate at high school. You complete the wisdom wing. So you do all the same work that we described before. You abide by the laws of karma, you live in vows, you do and you learn to meditate, you get concentration, you lessen the delusions, you lessen attachment and all the crazy delusions, and eventually you realize emptiness, and in some life or other, you will achieve your own liberation. And then when you die at the end of that life, you won't come back. You graduate at high school. That's your own nirvana, your own cessation of suffering. So how would you be? Okay. So because you rid the mind of all the delusions, you've got no longer any ego grasping, you've got no attachment, no anger, no jealousy, no depression, you've got incredible, and so naturally you're this, and you'd have lots of love and lots of virtue and lots of compassion, just naturally. Because the more you give up delusions, the more your virtues will just naturally flourish, because they're your true nature. Conventionally. So you'd be an astonishing person. You'd have incredible compassion for others. You'd have incredible love. But what's the difference between that love and compassion and the compassion of the Bodhisattva? The difference is this. Life after life after life, if your goal is your nirvana, and it's a pretty astonishing goal, life after life, that becomes your motivation. So then in that life, when in the life that you're going to achieve your own nirvana, when you do get rid of all the delusions, you realize emptiness, and then you've perfected that realization, you've achieved your own nirvana, then you would have unbelievable compassion for sentient beings. You'd be an extraordinary person, there's no question. But because your goal has been your nirvana, so when you die, the bliss in your mind overrides your compassion, and because of your motivation of wanting to achieve your liberation, you won't come back. You'll go into a subtle state of bliss. And so, okay, this is a very big difference in the Buddhist teachings now. In the Theravadan path, they say that once you've achieved your nirvana, even your mind ceases completely. There is nothing left. The Mahayana says, His Holiness said, we have a problem with that, because the Mahayana view says your mind continues. So the Mahayana interpretation of you've achieved your own nirvana, based upon your bliss overriding your compassion, you go into a subtle state of bliss and you stay there a long time. And then Buddha comes along and taps you on the shoulder and says, okay, honey, now you come out of this bliss now and hop on back onto the Mahayana path and become a Buddha and benefit sentient beings. But the point I'm making here is this: the difference between that compassion and the compassion of the Bodhisattva is this: that you're on the Bodhisattva path that's saying your goal is Buddhahood. Your goal is Buddhahood. So at some point, you might even achieve the same liberation. You might even achieve your own liberation. You've cut the root of the delusions. You won't need to come back. But because your motivation has been Buddhahood, which is based on compassion, and you have got this other compassion that's called great compassion, which is this very powerful sense of responsibility. It's not, so compassion is, oh my God, look at that suffering. But great compassion is, what can I do to take it away? That it's my job. And so as Lama Zopa says, you then develop this special attitude that says, it's even if I do it on my own, I will never give up becoming a Buddha, because I can then benefit sentient beings. So great compassion is not just look at that suffering, it's what can I do? So when you're on the Bodhisattva path, driven by this incredible compassion, when you die and you don't need to come back, your compassion, your great compassion overrides your bliss, and you will happily take rebirth, but out of choice now, because you want to become a Buddha so you can benefit all sentient beings. So that's the distinct characteristic of the compassion of the Bodhisattva path. Great compassion, Maha Karuna, and then this outrageous special attitude, It's huge, huge difference. And you work for life after life after life after life, bopping around, in life after life, benefiting sentient beings and literally growing your Buddhahood. Life after life, you're accumulating masses of virtue and wisdom until eventually you become a Buddha. And also the radical difference is when you're on the Bodhisattva path, and once you enter the first of the 10 stages of the Bodhisattva practice, which is when you've realized emptiness, and you're an Arya Bodhisattva. Even at that stage, of the first of the 10 stages before you become a Buddha, already you have the power, because of the intensity of your compassion and your wisdom, you have the power to manifest your mind in at least 100 different forms simultaneously to benefit sentient being. And that multiplies by 100 every single level. And by the time you're a Buddha, you are capable effortlessly of manifesting your mind in countless numbers of bodies throughout all the realms of existence, effortlessly, driven by this extraordinary compassion and this great wisdom to be of benefit to others. So the compassion of the Bodhisattva is unbelievable, unbelievable. In ordinary words, in ordinary terms, it just doesn't seem like possible. It's so outrageous. So extraordinary. What else? Any other questions before we finish? 10.
Yes, Venerable, we have a question relating to attachment.
Yes, good.
What if playing video games, etc., each day brings you joy and doesn't harm anyone else, and you're aware of your attachment to it? Is it still an addiction we should lessen?
It's a really good point, and that can be the same with anything we do at all. And this is where first initially it seems a bit depressing to us. The more we understand the Buddhist analysis of why we suffer, and this is where, okay, this is where we have to understand the different levels of suffering. I'm going to get to, this is all as a way of answering your question, okay? Give you a bit of context here. There are 3 levels of suffering in the Four Noble Truths. The first of these is the suffering of suffering. And that's the one that we all know is fairly evident. That's when basically the suffering of suffering is when the bad things happen, okay? When the bad things happen. Now, then the next level of suffering for the Buddha is actually what we, and this is the point, getting to your point now, this is where what we actually call that happiness. Buddha calls it the suffering of change. And I just indicated with the cake before, that actually we, not having the cake and having an empty stomach, that's the suffering of suffering. We want to stop that. So we get the cake. So now we call that is happiness. So basically the first level of suffering is when attachment doesn't get what it wants. And this is, okay, now, so before I say that, if we go to the second noble truth where Buddha talks about the causes of suffering. So in the causes of suffering, there are 2 main causes, he says, and they're both inside ourself. The first one is the past karmic action we did, that's driven by a delusion, and which is the second one. So the first cause of our suffering is the past action, and the second cause of suffering is the delusion that impelled it. So karma and delusions, these are the 2 causes of all our suffering. So if we look at this, the gross level of suffering, when you're not getting the cake and you're starving, that's the gross kind of suffering called the suffering of suffering. Due to stealing in the past, you can't get any food, and now you're suffering. And that's driven by your attachment in the past. So now that the second kind of suffering is a more subtle one, as I already indicated, because we think getting the cake is called happiness. That's the whole point. That's the entire point. So what we have to understand here is the more subtle delusion here is understanding the attachment. So in the second kind of suffering, what we think is happiness is Buddha's subtler level of suffering. Because, and I just indicated, it's called the suffering of change, because what appears to be delicious happiness, and the point is it is happiness that is triggered. It is a delicious feeling that's triggered on the basis of getting the cake or watching the video game or having the boyfriend, especially at the beginning. But so we can see it's so delicious, so exciting the first time, but because we're not satisfied, which is the disease of attachment, then we have to keep doing it, and we have to keep eating the cake. Okay, with video games, you can't eat for 5 hours unless you're really weird, but video games we can do for 10 hours sometimes. People who are addicted to sex might have 27 boys on one day. I remember one boy, and this is the interesting point about attachment. There's one boy who went to Sex Anonymous or whatever they're called. He's talked about his attachment. As he's having sex with one girl, he's already thinking about the next girl. Well, that's exactly the same with a video game. As you're doing this moment, you're wanting the next one. As you're having this cake, this moment of the mouthful of cake, you're already anticipating the next mouthful. That's the drama of attachment. So in the end, the Buddha says, when we start to look at attachment and see the pain it causes us, which means we think about it all the time, we're always feeling distressed, while you're doing your work, all you're thinking about is the video games. You can't wait to get to your video games. I mean, forget your video games. I love looking on my iPad. So as I'm doing my boring work, I'm thinking, as I'm doing my morning practice, and I'm very disciplined, I get up early, but believe me, I'm anticipating my breakfast automatically. It's behind in my mind. I make a joke about it. I don't pay attention to it. I don't give up and rush off to the breakfast. I do my practice, but I can't wait to get my breakfast. That's an ordinary, simple example of the depth of ordinary attachment. It's not just having the thing then. It's in your mind all the time, which is why we're distressed, meaning we're not content. So to see the subtler level of the suffering, the lack of contentment, the distress, always thinking about it, and then realizing when you do get the breakfast, when my breakfast is in my stomach, I go, oh, what happened? It's all gone. Am I more satisfied than I was before breakfast? No. So you've got to learn, and this is just a gross level of seeing the suffering of attachment. So given that it's pervasive, given that it's primordially deep, we have to be skillful. So we have discipline. Don't do 5 hours a day, maybe do 1 hour, and then learn while you know that 1 hour You know, when you do the 1 hour, you're still going to be distressed. You do 5 hours, you're still distressed. No matter what you do, you'll be distressed. But if you know you want to do your other work, you do your 1 hour. And then when you do it, and this is using the Bodhisattva path now, before you shove the cake in, before you shove in the boy, before you shove in the video game, you are conscious and aware. You know that you're not a yogi up in the mountains who can give up sex, drugs, and rock and roll and do nothing. You've still got to have attachment objects. So you do it wisely. You think about renunciation. You recognize it causes you suffering. You think about how it doesn't have any inherent nature. And you think, I'm going to do this so I can make me happy for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 1 hour, so I can be healthy, so I can benefit sentient beings. You make your motivation pure, which we must talk about tomorrow. You make your motivation pure, and then you won't be so grasping at the cake, and you won't be so grasping at the new boyfriend, and you won't be so grasping at the video game, and you'll still be disciplined. And then you'll be more content with yourself, because if you're disciplined, that's when you get satisfaction. When you discipline your body and speech, that's when satisfaction comes. Satisfaction will not come from 20 boys a day. It will not come from 27 pieces of cake or 5 hours of video games. Satisfaction comes from disciplining your attachment, because you feel some self-confidence that comes. So you work yourself gradually, and you be reasonable with yourself. Applying bodhicitta, applying emptiness, until eventually you won't care about video games. You won't care about food. You'll end up being like Geshe Lama Kontrog, one of our amazing lamas who was able to live in the mountains in 6 foot of snow in a hole in the wall, living in bliss, because he had no clothes, no food, no sleep, no possessions, and he lived in Vajrayogini's pure land, as Lama Zopa said, and he was able to get incredible realizations over a period of many years in meditation. That's what we're capable of. And he was in bliss the whole time. Why? Because he tasted the bliss of his own mind by giving up attachment, sex, drugs, rock and roll, and everything else. So slowly, slowly. Have some vision of our potential and gradually move towards it. Not be brutal with yourself and beat yourself up every 2 minutes. No, but do it with wisdom, including having to, if you have to have 10 boys a day, then do it with wisdom and compassion. Just be kind to them. Don't just eat them up for breakfast and spit out the bones. So you add wisdom and compassion to the mix, and that mitigates the actions, because everything's interdependent. Everything's dependent arising. I hope that helps.
That was great.
Good. Time to go.
Do you have time for one more?
Sure thing.
During this time of COVID, we seem to be observing attachment by many people who are attached to their own freedom, despite the threat to the health of others. How could our leaders better appeal to such selfish people when speaking on TV?
I mean, all they do is try. Every country in the world is the same. These fanatic, ridiculous people who are so obsessed with their own self-centeredness and even think that it's kind of against their human rights to not want to harm people. What can you do? I mean, the leaders on the television, they do their best, but no one listens. If you've got a stubborn mind, no one's going to listen. So what can you do? Keep out of their way, that's all. What can you do? It's human beings. We're ridiculous.
Thank you, Venerable.
Oh, darling. So I think, well, good. Thank you so much, everybody. We dedicate this 2 hours again, gone like a dream, as many moments as there have been, as many seeds we've planted, because nothing goes astray. Everything gone in, so we think this is delicious. Nourish these seeds. So why don't we just finish with the four immeasurable thoughts, this marvelous bodhicitta thoughts. Come in. Someone's there. Come in. No, she's not. Okay, so we just finished with the four immeasurable thoughts. This is the bodhisattva attitude, a brave attitude of the bodhisattvas. So we just think how wonderful it would be if all sentient beings could abide in equanimity, free of attachment, ignorance, and anger. May they abide so. I will make this happen. That's that brave attitude, the special attitude of the great compassion. I will make this happen. Please, Guru Buddha, bless me to be able to do this. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings could be free of suffering and its causes. I will make this happen. Please, Guru Buddha, bless me to be able to do this. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings could have happiness and its causes. May they have them. I will make this happen. Please, Guru Buddha, bless me to be able to do this. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were never parted from higher rebirths and liberation's excellent bliss. May they never be parted. I will make this happen. Please, Guru Buddha, bless me to be able to do this. Jangchob semchog rinpoche, ma ke panam ke gyochig, ke panyam pa me payang, gong ne gong du pa ba shok. Gewa di nyudo dag, lama sange drugyone, drowa chikyang marupa, deyi sala gopa shok. All right. Thank you, Rain. Thank you, everybody. And everybody on YouTube whom I can't see. Much love to all of you. And rejoice, rejoice, rejoice. And learn to be, Lama Yesi says, try to be satisfied now. So what does that mean? You don't expect the feeling to come, but you say the words, I'm doing great. I'm doing a good job. I am content. You practice it. You change your script in your head, okay? And then as the Tibetans would say, nothing gets more difficult with practice. So be so happy, everybody. Much love.
Thank you so much. See you tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Robina. Thank you again.
Thank you. Ben.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. There was some questions I didn't get time to ask today, but I have written them down and I'll ask tomorrow. So thank you so much, and I'll see you same time tomorrow.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, Ray. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.